The first step in fitting your front top skin is to take a ratcheting tie-down strap, as you see here, around the front and tightly, or not too tightly, but you're basically just trying to get enough pressure to suck the front top skin down nicely along this edge. So this isn't actually a gap here, this is just because this needs to get, when it gets riveted, it'll hold up in there. So you can see that the top skin is tight to the firewall itself. So you'll want to position it so that this corner and the corner on the other side are both flush to the edge of your skin here. And you'll also want to orient it centered in this direction. A good way to make sure that it's centered is you've got two dimples right here, and your seam between these two retaining strips. And that'll, if you center that seam in these two dimples, you'll be pretty much good to go and nice and centered there. So once you've got that done, your next step is to double check the fit of the back side of it along here and on both sides, and make sure that it's as even as possible. You don't want this side much higher than this side or vice versa. And so once you've got that done, the next step is we're going to match drill all the holes along the top, the front edge here on the firewall. And we'll start from the top and work our way down tightly. This part is a little bit difficult, but using the right tools and the right process, we'll be able to make sure everything's nice and tight and fitting nicely. So this tool here is a hole finder. They're available on Aircraft Spruce or any number of online sites. So I really like these. They're very handy for finding holes. They come in really handy for this process as well as many others, but the pin at the bottom goes into the hole you're trying to find, and then the hole at the top is your drill guide. So you'll slide this underneath and locate each hole along the way and install a cleco as you go. So we'll go ahead and use this now and start getting some holes drilled. Okay, so now that we've got everything match drilled, you can see the edge of the front edge of the front top skin lines up perfectly with the flanges of the firewall the whole way along, and most importantly, it lines up perfectly with the edge of the skin on both sides. In addition to that, you can see that we've got it all the way set and resting nicely against the side skins on both sides, left and right. So once you've got it to this stage, and also the sub panel rib here lines up, within a 1/4 inch or so of the edge of this. It's better to have that sub panel rib very slightly inset than it is outset, but this one lined up just about maybe 3 or 4 millimeters inset. And of course you can adjust that to make sure it fits both tightly up and down, side to side, and all of that. So the next step here is we've got both sides marked to the joggle of the windshield. We're going to trim off just a little bit off the end of each side, left and right. And that's just so that this front top skin can rest nicely and tightly up inside here like this. So we'll just trim off a hair there and a little bit on the other side. And so now we're going to pull off this top skin, trim off those two ends, and countersink all the holes. Oh, also you can see that these are all drilled up to 4mm for 4mm countersunk rivets along the firewall, 3.2s everywhere else. Of course, we don't have to countersink these. It'll just be everything that's exposed on the outside. So we'll get that done now. So now that our front top skin has been match drilled and clecoed into position, this is a good time before we rivet and bond the front top skin on. This is a good time to test fit your leather dash piece here. So what you're looking for is a nice tight fit the whole way along here. As far as this side goes, that's what we're looking for. And we do in fact have that here. And On this side of the dash, we're basically looking to make sure that the dash is lined up with the edge of your canopy here and on this side as well. And that's fitting, so that way your dash is straight to your canopy and straight inside the fuselage. And so that's what we've got here. In order to do this, you'll cleco on your dash support angles like this. You can see I've powder coated mine black. They are visible underneath there when everything is said and done. So if you want to paint them or powder coat or what have you so that it kind of blends in a little bit better, this is also a good time to do that. You can see here that I've got my fuel selector just clecoed into place here. Also, the dash has been trimmed out. I'll show that in another video. The fuel selector is clecoed into position here, and that's so that we can get our fuel lines cut to length and fitted right now. This plane is using Teflon lines, but the process is going to be the same whether you use rubber hoses, aluminum, Teflon, whatever the case may be. The reason for doing this now is that we want to be able to make sure that the fuel lines are tightened on the inside of the bulkhead fitting that goes through the firewall before the front top skin is installed. You can definitely do it afterwards, but it's a lot easier to do it with the top skin off because it's clearly accessible. So yeah, like I said, we've got all of that done, so we can now remove the components and get the front top skin installed. Before riveting and bonding the front top skin into place, you'll want to make sure that you've got everything, if possible, secured in the area that it's going to cover. So that includes the fuel lines tightened to the bulkhead fittings through the firewall, the brake line is in place, your parachute cables and tangs are mounted adequately. So this line right here is the static port. So this is a new location for the static port that's not yet been fully tested by the factory, but we're going to go ahead and use this location and see how it goes. So at some point in the future, this may or may not be the final static location, so just be aware of that. So, and if it is the final location, once again, you'll want to make sure you have those lines run. Your heater ducting should all be taken care of in place. My boost pump, the auxiliary boost pump, is installed here. This is not the standard location. We had to move it for the heater ducting that we're trying out here on this plane. So keep in mind that your boost pump typically mounts on a shelf here, just past your fuel selector. So that's another thing, having that line from your boost pump to your firewall secured. And keep in mind that all of this stuff actually can be accessed after the front top skin is on. So if you're stuck and you need to do your windshield, or you want to get your cowling trimmed or whatever it is, and that's all you've got left, you could certainly do this. You're just going to have to crawl underneath everything to access this. And I'm a little bit too large and too inflexible to do it, so this is my preferred method. In addition to everything else I've mentioned, your heater wiring should be taken care of, or at least have your heater wire pulled out past your sub panel rib here for accessibility later. On the other side here, you'll want to make sure that all your heater coolant lines are secured in place and up to your standards. Your ECU, whether you're mounting it, this is a new location for the ECU mount. The standard location is on the back of this sub panel rib here. So regardless of your mount location, you'll want to make sure that all those wires are hooked up and the ECU is mounted and all of that, because if on the back of the sub panel rib, it's almost completely inaccessible after the front top skin is installed. A couple other things, your heater control line right here, should be installed. It's very difficult to access after the front top skin is on. As I mentioned earlier, all of your ducting should be installed because this is the defrost vent that mounts to the front top skin. And so through the test fitting of the front top skin, we've gotten this positioned and cut to length and bent properly. And lastly, if possible, you'll want to have all of your wires taken care of going through the firewall. So if we change the angle here, you can see just slightly right here, I've got, it's actually the fuel line insulation cut into strips like this, wrapped tightly around the wires, zip tied and mounted into position. And that seals up the hole where all the wires pass through the firewall. It's a lot easier to do this when you can access both sides so that you're able to work from, we're not going to be able to get that angle in there, but so that you're able to work from the front and the back of the firewall just to make sure that all of that's secured nicely up to your standards. So after all of this, we are about ready. Lastly, I guess, and this is not as critical as a lot of the other things I've mentioned, but the throttle cable here, and all of these things are mentioned in other videos, so you can go through and for all the heater assembly stuff, you can see the heater video and so on. But the throttle cable does pass through the firewall. You could see it on the other side right here. That's a lot less critical. You will be able to feed that through without the top skin on, but just being as thorough as possible here because you do lose a lot of accessibility behind the sub panel rib here. So another thing worth mentioning is you can see I've got my front upholstery side panels installed. I like to do this before the front top skin is on as well because you have a lot more access back here to the side panel to get it mounted and secured. In addition to that, carpeting underneath your rudder pedals and in the back area there is much easier to access right now. So there's, as you can see, the carpet is down in place and ready to go. Just everything that you can see that might be behind underneath the front top skin, behind the sub panel rib here. It's just easier to do it ahead of time, a little bit of forethought, and should be good to go. But I've mentioned now everything that I have done in preparation for the front top skin. So let's get it bonded on. So this is the final fit up for the front top skin before we bond it. As you can see, we've got all of the holes countersunk and ready to go. All of these on the sides. Everything on the exterior of the front top skin has been countersunk. None of these need to be. So you want to be careful when you're countersinking these holes. You don't want to go too deep. The rivet can break through the remaining composite, but you also don't want to go too shallow. If you go too shallow, then you won't be able to cover those holes with superfill and get a nice smooth exterior finish. So the last thing that I like to do is I apply this masking tape right along the edge of the cowl mount flange and the top skin here. And it's got its slight curve to it as it goes along. This is normal, so that's why there's a lot of small pieces here. And that just is because of all of the sealing locations on the entire front top skin, probably the most important is along this front edge here. If you're flying through a little bit of rain or whatever it might be, the rain can slide in through here, and of course that's where all your avionics are. All the sensitive electronics are up there. So what I like to do is when I install the top skin, I put the Sikaflex along this, and I put enough so that I can see some squeeze out come out the front. And I do try to position that Sikaflex so that the majority, if not all of the squeeze out comes out the front. So that means shifting just slightly this direction. from the center of the firewall flange. Of course, it's okay if a little bit of squeeze out goes to the backside, but we certainly don't want any drips on our carpets or anything like that. So, and then immediately after I install the top skin, I can pull off this tape and not have to deal with nearly as much of that squeeze out on that cowl mount flange. So, so one other thing that you want to keep in mind is taking on and off this top skin. You'll probably do it a couple times before you bond it in for final mount. You want to do that before you countersink, and once you've countersunk, it's pretty much just one cleco for fit up, and then we remove it to bond it. And that's because from going in and out with the clecos, you can slightly enlarge these countersunk holes, and it's just out of an abundance of caution that I try to avoid doing that. So, all right, let's get this pulled off and prepped for Sikaflex and installed. So here we've got the fuselage prepped, and the Sikaflex has been applied to rivet on the front top skin. So of course I've abraded the surface where the Sikaflex is going to adhere to. I don't use the primer or the activators for the Sika products here. Just the 295 UV by itself will adhere perfectly fine here in this situation because there are rivets as well. We won't need to, it's not like the windows where it's the exclusive bond. So you could see I've applied the Sikaflex just along the front surface here where the seal needs to be made. This will stop any squeeze out from going inside the fuselage, but it will give an adequate seal where it's actually needed. So let's get this top skin riveted on. Okay, so the front top skin is fitted up and bonded into position. So the process, you know, for riveting it is straightforward and simple enough. A couple things, pretty much the only thing to make note of is I do not put any Sikaflex between the front top skin and the canopy, basically here to here. And that's just because, you know, once we get our windshield trimmed and it's time to bond that, then I will put that Sikaflex there. If we were to accidentally glue it in a little bit too tight, a little bit too loose, or whatever the case may be, of course that would cause problems later on when it's time to fit the windshield. So that's really the only exception. Everything else is complete and done. So one of the last steps with the front top skin is you'll probably notice a very, very faint film, either pinkish in color or greenish in color. That's PVA. It's the mold release that they use to lay up this part. It's water soluble, so just take a nice wet rag and wipe it all down and you'll be able to get it all off. Definitely you want to take care of that before paint. It just flakes right off, and so make sure to go ahead and give that a good wipe down. And then the last step after that is you can see here we've got super fill. You can use just regular automotive body filler as well if you prefer, to kind of flush out all those countersunk rivets. So you can see everywhere that there's a rivet, you just kind of smear it on, block sand it smooth, and then just maybe 2 or 3 rounds of that and you should have it nice and smooth. So it kind of disappears the rivets. And because they're just countersunk into this composite piece, it doesn't really look all that great to just fill the head of the rivet like we do with the rest of the process. So, yep, just using a squeegee, just kind of squeegee over all the rivets. And in addition to that, you can see there's some little small blue specks here. And that's because every once in a while, when they mold apart, there will be a little bit of outgassing from the epoxy in the resin. And that causes like a very small bubble. And so you'll want to go around and look very carefully for these small bubbles, poke them through, and then just fill them with the super fill. And that'll ensure that they don't crack off sometime later on after paint, and then you just kind of got a void there. So yeah, so like I said, super fill, a couple of rounds of block sanding, and it should all come out really smooth. I do like to do this The first couple rounds of it you can do right away. Then the rest of it I do with the cowling, the top cowling in place. And that way you can really see that you're following the contours of the top cowling as well as the front top skin. So everything kind of flushes up and looks really good together. So that's it for the front top skin.